Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. You think I would know that by now. Today on the program, we'll be joined by Lisa Haver as she describes last week's school board meeting. Lance Haver will discuss the updated 76ers place legislation, and we'll do our upcoming preview of next week's election. So to get things started with us, oh, there's Denise. Hello, Denise. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. We have a big show tonight. In the second half of the show, we're going to do our election predictions as well. So that'll be interesting. I have a chart made up.
Oh
So
my.
I prepared this. Yes. Nobody can
Well,
see
that's
it
what I
because
love about you, Larry. You
yeah,
have the charts and graphs.
yeah. But before we get to that, let's bring on Lisa Haver, our education correspondent. Lisa, how are you tonight?
I'm great. Hey, Larry. Hey, Denise. How are you?
We're good. How
Thank
are
you.
you?
Good.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we last week was a crazy week in general in city politics. We all know what happened at city council last week. Probably something similar might happen again tomorrow. We'll see. But something even crazier happened that same day at the school board. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen news stories describe it as, chaos. And, to me, if you're a governmental body, you really should expect people to come and protest and, hold up signs and make some noise and disrupt your meeting a little bit. And what I wrote for Hall Monitor was a contrast between what happened in city council in the morning and what happened at the board of ed later that day in the afternoon. And it was comparable. It wasn't the exact same type of situation, but the people from Chinatown and other communities who are fighting the building of the arena in Center City had come, and they had their rally outside and they had speakers. They came into the chamber, and I think everybody was fully expecting them to stand up and hold up their signs and chant and make their demands, which is what they did. And they did it once, and they chanted and made noise for about 2 minutes. They sat down, and Council President Kenyatta Johnson said, you can't disrupt city council business, and if you're going to do that, yeah, I shouldn't say that. He did not say that. He did not issue any kind of warning or threat. He said we need to get on with the bill, the business of council. All right. 5 minutes later, they stood up. The protesters stood up, and they did the same thing. And they chanted, and they made their demands, and they held up signs. And the council president waited. And after that, the protesters, the representatives from those communities left. Most of them, almost all of them left. And the council president said, well, this is why I love America. And just carried on with the council business. We've been in, I've been going to, I was there for that. I've been in city council many times, and many people with many causes have stood up and disrupted the meeting and chanted. And some have even engaged in civil disobedience where they just, wait for the security or the police to take them out. But what happened in the board meeting later on was there's this case that's been going on for 8 or 9 months now, with a teacher whose students made a presentation and has had something to do with what is happening in the Middle East and the people in Palestine. And I don't have to tell you how touchy that subject is and how people are feeling very strongly about that. And the teacher who is the teacher of the students who made the presentation has been suspended from her job at our high school. And so people have been coming, people, parents of Northeast High students, the students themselves, teachers, not just from Northeast High, but in a lot of places have come, and they've come month after month after month and said they want this teacher reinstated. Well, after 8 months, when they saw that they were not being heard or responded to, and that this teacher not only had not been reinstated, but was actually possibly facing harsher action, they stood up, they came to the front of the room, and they held up their signs. And they did say, we're not just going to shut this meeting down until we're heard and until this teacher is reinstated. Now, the protesters, and I'm talking about city council, most of them were in the mezzanine or they were in the back of the room and council was up there. It was a little different situation at the board because when the protesters came up, they're standing right in front of the board members. But as I said, there was no verbal back and forth. There were no threats. There was no physical confrontation. The security was there, of course, but for as long as I was in the room and the other APS members were there the whole time, nobody had to be restrained. But less than a minute after the protesters stood up, the board members left. They just walked out and didn't say, we're leaving. This is what's going. Just left, and nobody really knew what was going on. And we waited, except the APS members had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen because it had happened 5 years before. And when it happened before, one difference is the board president at that time, Joyce Wilkerson, did try to regain control of the meeting. She tried to address the protesters. Superintendent Height, who was there at the time, tried to talk to the protesters. They tried to, and they couldn't. They just couldn't regain control of the meeting. So they left and they went down to another room. What they did and what President Streeter did this time was then conduct a meeting in a room without the public. And you can't do that. You can't have a private meeting, even if all the public speakers are done and even if you have a camera set up. That is not a public meeting. And one concrete reason why that is a problem and a violation of the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act is that means nobody's in the room if they want to file an objection, which we do, APS members do all the time. When we feel that they're taking a vote, which they're voting on something that they haven't fully told the public about, whether it's any part of that official item, but mostly the cost of that item, we stand up, usually me, stand up and say, under Section 710C of the Sunshine Act, I'm filing a formal objection, and you give the reason. Well, the board that night was voting on 2 Keystone Opportunity Zone extensions, and those are one type of tax abatements for developers in this city. And these were actually extensions, one on the Hillco Bellwether area in Southwest Philly, and the other one for the Navy Yard, certain properties in both of those sites. And I had fully intended to stand up and object and say, under Section 710C of the Sunshine Act, you're taking what amounts to a vote in secret because you haven't told people how much this is going to cost the district. Well, I wasn't there, not for lack of trying, because I stood outside that door for 20 minutes and just banged on the door. And you can hear me, and you can actually hear some of the board members on the mics, which they did not realize were on, saying, why is she knocking? And is she taking pictures? I mean, they knew I was there. They saw me as they came into the room. They heard me. They didn't let me in. They didn't let any reporters in. They didn't let anybody in. That's not a public meeting.
I have a question though, Lisa. They didn't let anyone in, but they took a vote. Was there even like a closed circuit camera so you could watch them taking the vote?
You could watch it. You could watch it. Yeah. That happened 5 years ago, and that happened last week. You can watch it, but you have no control over that. You can't file an objection. You can't. I mean, there might be times when you need to stand up and say something that's not necessarily a formal objection. You're not there.
So that meant that they took that vote in that room. There was no additional public comment. Basically, and they wouldn't let the reporters in to cover it.
Reporters just had to sit there and look at that screen, like everybody else.
So has anyone filed a complaint about this? Because this sounds to me like something that the Pennsylvania News Association should be apprised of and something filed.
Actually, Kristen Greb wrote a story in the Inquirer the Friday, the day after that meeting, and she interviewed one of the people on staff at that organization, Denise, that you're mentioning. And I will just say that we have not ruled out taking legal action. There are a number of things that the board could have done. Now, I say you could have tried to talk to the people. All right, if the president of the board and the other members of the board feel that somehow, it's like they feel like they're in danger and they had to leave, well, okay. But if you felt that those protesters who really were standing up and talking and holding signs and nothing more, if you somehow felt for some reason that they were going to become violent, what about the rest of the people in the auditorium? Like if you really felt that these people, who I have to say again, were doing nothing but engaging in peaceful protest. Yes, they disrupted the meeting. That's still peaceful protest. But somehow, if you up there felt like you were in danger and had to escape, how come nobody else in the auditorium was in danger? They could have gotten security to take all the protesters out and then open the room and let everybody else in. They could have done what they have done actually on a few occasions in the past when certain things have to be voted on within a certain time. And I know what happened. I can't recall what the exact issue was, but there have been times when they have recessed a meeting and then resumed that meeting either, the following day or a couple days later as a public meeting. So they really have no good reason for locking the public out and taking votes on total of $94 million in contracts, not including the KOZs. And, we have talked about this so many times that the board it's not operating in the way that it should, which is supposed to be, a governmental body that is open to the public. Their speaker suppression policies have been in effect now for 3-4 years. You have to give people an opportunity to speak, to be heard. The board is not operating in any kind of independent way. When those board members are sworn in, they do not swear any kind of allegiance to the president. The president is a facilitator. The president is not in charge of the people on that board. You don't see this here. You see that much more if you go to a board meeting out in Haverford or, Elkins Park or any. Those people are elected to the board. They're responsible to the voters. You hear a lot more interaction and you hear people speaking up. There are people on that board who have said almost nothing in the 6 months that they've been sworn in. And that's not how the board is supposed to operate. And so when you see the board doing things, but you don't hear from them and they don't interact, just by deductive reasoning, who are they listening to? Well, they're listening to the developers that they did grant these extensions to. City council has to vote on them, and so does the Board of Education. But they can't go through without the board vote. They listen to Mayor Sherrill Parker's Commerce Department reps who came to that meeting and had a substantial amount of time given to them on the official agenda to make their presentation, their slideshow. There was no counter presentation. There are really valid reasons not to extend those KOZs. I linked in my hall monitor piece to a really good article that was in Chalkbeat that Carly Citron wrote that said, in essence, yeah, you can have internship programs for kids, and maybe you have a few pilot programs, payments in lieu of taxes, but the case is clear that the district is losing a lot more money because the developers do not pay these taxes.
Yeah.
So who are they being responsive to? There were, I'm going to say 8, 9, maybe 10 students who came to a kind of, I don't want to say beg. They were very, dignified. But they made their case. These students who came from a number of high schools, including Palumbo here in South Philly, to say you have to restore the funding for extracurricular activities. There have been recent news stories about how things like robotics and debate club, not sports, but those type of activities, and students talked about how important they were, and really helped them to open up to other students, and really meant a lot to them. And the cuts has just been slashed, but nobody really responded to them, except to say things like, "Oh, we're like Fraser Crane, kind of like, I'm listening. Oh, we're hearing what you have to say," but you didn't say what you were going to do about it. So are people feeling heard? Do they feel like there's anybody on that board of those 9 people who will step out and say, well, wait a minute, I think we need to rethink this? No, you don't.
Yeah. We had some hope that when Reginald Streeter and the new people came in, that maybe things would be a little different, but it sounds like it's the same, if not maybe a little worse.
I will say it's certainly not better.
Yeah.
And there were people on the previous board, the board members that Mayor Kenny appointed, and 4 of those previous board members were reappointed by Mayor Parker. And so she appointed 5 new people in a, completely closed process where there's no public testimony. There's no public disclosure of who's applying. In other words, like who applied and didn't get in. And there's really no accountability to the public. I mean, if you're not even supposed to know, and as I pointed out before, like there are people on that board that you like haven't really said anything other than, yes, no,
yeah,
present, haven't said anything about anything. And, we're really facing a crisis here because the board is already talking about closing more neighborhood schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're holding meetings, but when you go to the district webpage, and I think it was Superintendent Watlington who talked about this and he said at the meeting, we're in phase 7. And I thought, well, what happened to the first 6 phases?
Yeah.
But if the public was part of that, we didn't know anything about it. We as in apps, we go to everything. But they're having, they call it the facilities planning process, which is a way to say we're going to close schools. But would people have any reason to think that when they say, please don't close my school, or please don't close my child's school, or please don't close my neighborhood school, that they're really being heard? Because this present board, I don't think has established confidence in the public that we're really, really listening to you. When those students came up and talked about how important robotics was and how important debate was to them and the other EC activities, really, you're not going to say anything other than, okay, we heard you.
All right. Well, Lisa, where can people?
I have one more question.
Yeah.
What is the status of Miss Ridgway now? Is she still kind of in the ether? Are they going to bring her back? What's the status of that?
Well, they say, and technically, of course, they're correct, we don't discuss personnel matters.
Mhm.
But, you know, it's not just a matter of Miss Ridgway. It's a matter of the students who gave the projects whose identities were disclosed by other staff people, and that's a serious, that's illegal. That has not been dealt with. There's, I mean, like I say, if you are a governmental body, you can't just sit there and go, you know, stare blankly at people and not think they're coming back. And these people just kept coming back. And every time they came back, their numbers grew. And there should have been a plan by the district, by the board to say, okay, we got to deal with this. What's happening now? They don't say, of course. All I know is like what everybody else knows, that she's not there. She's suspended. I have no idea what that status is. I don't know. No, I don't know but what I think the board can do is other things that give people confidence. Okay, we cannot tell you what we're doing in this disciplinary case with this one teacher, but let's get together. Let's talk about, you know, a lot of this was about censorship of students. There are other teachers who have gotten caught up in this net, not necessarily around Miss Ridgway, but there have been other incidents in other schools where people have felt that they're being censored. Students who have come, you know, they've come to the board meetings and talked about this. Those are the issues where you can say, I cannot tell you what's going on with Miss Ridgway. That's a personnel matter. Fine, okay, protect her, you know, her own personal business. But there's a lot of issues around this about how to deal with censorship and issues that come up that are controversial. That's what people want to know. And when you have kind of like blank faces looking at you, that nobody's getting that feeling that, okay, maybe they can't talk to me about this one person, but we're going to try to figure out how to deal with the larger issues here. They're not getting that.
All right, Lisa, where can people learn more about the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools?
Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools. Well, you can come to any board meeting and we're there. We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're Apps Philly, on Twitter.
All right, Lisa Haver, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yes, thank
Larry.
you.
Thanks, Denise. Take care.
All right, now we'd like to bring on consumer reporter Lance Haver to discuss the updated 76th place legislation. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I have a fair amount to go through, so I know it's election week, so I'm going to get right to it. Now, I do want to say we sent a copy of this to Council Member Squilla, who introduced the legislation, and we also sent a copy of this to the press office of Council President Johnson. And Council Member Squilla has said he'd be happy to come on the air and talk with us about it.
Great.
So hopefully we'll get that lined up in the next week or so, right after the election.
Absolutely.
And he can talk a little bit about some of the projections that I'm making. So I'd like to start by just saying there was a study that the city ordered done. They hired an outside consultant. No surprise here, the Sixers paid for the study. The study said, without a doubt, quote, given Chinatown's tightly interwoven cultural and social network and the incompatibility of many important businesses with the arena, the project impact may negatively interfere with Chinatown goals. In other words, due to the impact on labor markets and small businesses, Chinatown's core identity could be significantly diminished. Goes on to point out that many of the small businesses in Chinatown rent, and this type of a project is going to force rent up, and that 68.5% of the renters are going to be vulnerable to displacement. The study, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. The study makes recommendations calling for 5 additional studies, looking at all of the things that have to be done. One of the concerns that they raised is what will happen to Reading Terminal, which is also adjacent to the proposed arena, and what will happen if you try and keep that as a place where local people shop for produce and fish and meat. If you have a stadium there, you know, people can say, yes, I'm going to the 76ers. I'm going to get there a little early, go to Reading Terminal and buy produce and take it with me to the game. You can say that, but I think it would be disingenuous. What's going to happen, of course, is if you put 18,000 people, assuming it's a sellout, in Reading Terminal right before the game, they're going to be buying takeout food. They're going to be buying food and they're not going to be buying produce, fish, meat, cheese, any of the things that local people use to shop. And we already know from the convention center what the impact on the Reading Terminal market is when you have a large thing like the auto show. It makes it too crowded for people to shop there for staples, and people come there and enjoy the takeout food. The thing to keep in mind is, of the 5 additional studies that the city had undertaken that the Sixers paid for, the 5 things that the study said had to happen before it went forward, as of right now, none of them have happened. Not a single one of the 5 things has happened. Now, I'm just going to read you a direct quote. There's no question that Chinatown's at risk. And it's not what I say, and it's not what Chinatown says, it's not what Washington Square West says, which are the 2 neighborhood RCOs that are affected by the stadium. This is what the consultant the 76ers paid for says. As a result, the arena should be considered a significant potential risk to Chinatown's core identity. Now, the mayor's very clear. She drafted the legislation and asked Councilman Squilla to introduce it. The mayor says there'll be no direct city subsidies for the arena. And that is true. There's no money that comes from the city's operating budget directly to pay for, to give to the Sixers. It's all indirect. The project will not pay any property taxes at all. Instead, it will make payments, which are often called pilots, payment in lieu of taxes. The second tax that's under the radar that people don't realize is the use and occupancy tax. And again, this is a tax that everybody else has to pay, but by special arrangements for the 76ers, they won't have to pay it. The difference between what those taxes would be and what the Sixers are going to pay, I'm not sure whether you would want to call it a subsidy, but it's certainly something. So the real estate tax is school tax and goes to the general operating budget. When you add it up, it becomes 1.4%. Everybody pays that real estate tax. There are some exemptions, homestead exemptions. If you live in your property, obviously no one's going to live at the arena, or I should say, hopefully no one's going to live at the arena, so it wouldn't be eligible for a homestead exemption. So they should be paying 1.4% of the value of the property. They're not going to pay a real estate tax. Instead, they're going to pay $5 million a year. When you do the math, that means that the city is saying that the arena is worth $357 million. Now, the Sixers are going to pay between $1.2 and $1.5 billion for the arena. And it's not clear yet exactly how much, because there are really no plans as of yet. But let's just say it's $1 billion. Let's say, it's $1 billion. Now, it is possible that these very wealthy, very sophisticated business people are going to pay 4 times as much or 3 times as much for the arena as what the arena is worth. I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's accurate. It's hard to believe that these very sophisticated people are going to pay that much more. So if we say it's worth $1 billion, which again is 66% of the higher level that they say, they should be paying $14 million a year in taxes. Instead, they're only paying $5 million, which means that they're getting a $9 million a year break. It's not a direct subsidy, but instead of having to pay $4 million, they only have to pay $5 million. Now, without any inflationary multiplications, without any thinking about what property will be worth 30 years from now, just straight lines, 30 times 9 is a $270 million break that they're getting. Anybody else would have to pay $270 million more than what the 76ers are. Now, while that's an awful lot, it's even more when you consider the deal that they're getting for the use and occupancy tax. Now, I know this is a confusing issue for most of us, so we can go over this one a little slower. The use and occupancy tax, and this comes directly from the city's webpage. Use and occupancy tax rate is 1.21% of the assessed value of property with a $2,000 annual tax exemption. The city puts on its webpage, can you be excused from paying the tax? The answer is no. Direct quote from the city's webpage. Now that's accepted to the 76ers. Under the terms of the agreement that was put forward, that council member Squila put forward that's going to be voted on, the arena company shall be responsible for the payment of all applicable use and occupancy taxes, U&O taxes, with respect to the arena premises pursuant to a use and occupancy tax settlement. The agreement shall provide for an annual payment of use and occupancy taxes in the initial amount of $500,000 for each of the first 10 years. So again, just like with the real estate taxes, the stadium doesn't have to pay the actual tax. They get a special deal. Now, what was that? How good is that special deal? $500,000 payment would equate to a building worth not $1 billion, not $500 million, not $250 million, but $42 million. The arena, again, I'm just saying, worth $1 billion. They should be paying $12.1 million a year based on that $1 billion amount. So every year, on top of the break they get on the real estate taxes, they would get an $11.6 million break on the use and occupancy tax. So they would be getting a savings of $348 million. If we combine the two discounts, you don't want to call them subsidies, just discounts, what we get is $270 million discount for the pilots, instead of paying real estate taxes, the pilots, $348 million on the use and occupancy taxes. Now, the city says they're going to donate $50 million. We're going to look at that next, because that's really not true. But the city says that they're going to donate $50 million, giving them the benefit of the doubt. The actual break that the Sixers are going to get, $270 million for real estate taxes, $348 million for the use and occupancy taxes. They're going to, quote unquote, contribute $50 million. So they get over $500 million in tax breaks. Now, if we were to take that money and simply use it to create jobs, and we were talking about $30,000 per jobs, we'd be talking about over 3,000 new jobs. But instead, we're giving it to the billionaires. Now, there's been absolutely no indication that we need a new stadium. This is not like replacing lead pipes. It's not like replacing sidewalks that are falling apart or fixing streets that are falling in. We have very significant issues with our infrastructure because of the age of our city. Anyone who's driven underneath the train trestles in Philadelphia knows that there's a need for investment there. There is no need for a new arena. There is a desire for it. People may want it, but that's very different than saying we have thousands of homes with lead water pipes where kids are getting lead poisoning. So again, what could the $568 million do? Could create 3,000 new jobs, replacing the lead pipes, fixing the infrastructure, fixing the train trestles. So the community benefit agreement isn't a community agreement. The two neighborhood groups, RCOs, Chinatown and Washington Square West, are not part of it. They didn't negotiate it. In fact, both of them come out and said, we don't want it. The amount of money that's actually set aside to help Chinatown is so small, it's really kind of crazy. They've set aside $400,000 a year for 4 years to help the Chinatown businesses that are going to be disrupted. The study that the Sixers paid for said there are 380 businesses that will be affected. That breaks down to $1,052 per business for 4 years. So if you're going to disrupt the sidewalks, the roads, the streets, each one of these businesses is going to lose significantly more than $1,000 a year. But the only amount of money is set aside because all the other money goes to what the mayor and council want to do.
Excuse me,
The only money
Lance?
goes directly to the businesses that are going to be disrupted. is $1,000 for 4 years.
I have a question though.
Sure.
Is this the original community benefits agreement or the
This-
one that Mark Squilla just renegotiated that basically took all the money that council was going to get away and put it toward the special services district?
Well, I'm going to get into that. This is the new one. This is based on the new one. You're right. Denise, that's an excellent point, and let me get to it. There is also $3 million set aside to support a range of city-coordinated housing programs in Chinatown. Again, there the word is city-coordinated. There's no estimate of how many people will be helped, how many new places will be built, how many apartments, and there's absolutely no indication or even a projection that this relatively small amount of money, it'd be a lot of money if any one of us had it. We just talk about having $3 million to try and deal with 20,000 displaced people. It's really a very small amount of money. But there's absolutely no projection of what that will do to stop a dramatic rise in real estate prices and rents. Now, the point that Denise was making is the largest amount in the community benefits agreement helps the Sixers directly, doesn't help the community. The largest payment is $14,150,000, which pays for an arena special district. So this will clean up the arena. This will give the arena new streetlights. This will help the arena have more retail. It's something that other parts of the city do. There's a Center City Business District. There's many districts. The difference here is nobody calls it a community benefit agreement. What they say is the businesses have gotten together and decided to pay extra taxes so that they can have special services. In this case, it's being sold as something that the Sixers are doing for the community, when clearly it is something done for the Sixers. There is $7 million to help the mayor fulfill her campaign pledge to have after school and year-round school enrichment activities, which again is a great thing, but this payment doesn't go to the people who will be harmed. This payment goes to help the mayor fulfill a campaign promise. Of the $50 million, $3.75 million is an in-kind contribution, meaning Sixers don't pay a penny of it. They just say, you know, we're giving away some tickets and we'll let you use the space, and we value that at $3.75 million. $3 million goes to SEPTA, again, which makes it easier for the Sixers to get their fans to the games or the events, and $12.25 million helps the Sixers fulfill all of the guidelines that they've entered into for minority businesses and hiring local people. That $12.25 million is a gift the 76ers are giving themselves to help them meet their commitment. It's confusing, and I apologize for the slide, but the limitations and the deals are so great that the city can't do this in a straightforward fashion. So the Sixers buy the land, the city condemns land, the city closes the streets, and then the city gets all the land. And then the city gives it to an authority, the paid authority, which then leases the land to the Sixers. By doing it that way, the Sixers avoid paying the real estate taxes, and they can enter into a special deal. What it means, though, is the city is actually responsible for all of the short costs and for any of the shortfall that comes about. This is, again, directly from the lease agreement. The city covenants unconditionally to pay all service fee payments and all other amounts due as provided for under the service agreement to pay the authority, which has been given all the land, only out of current revenues of the city, which payments shall not be suspended. So if there's something that goes wrong, if unfortunately we have another pandemic or something that requires the stadium to stop selling tickets, who's on the hook? Not the Sixers, not even paid, which is really a fiction, but the city taxpayers will be the ones who are what's called the backstop. We're guaranteeing this. All the comparisons between this and what else are based on a no-growth model. So it is true the fashion district is suffering. They have not yet, and they may never recover from COVID or the end of pandemic. But the analysis is all done based on that they will never increase sales, that over the next 30 years, nothing will change. It will all be based on what happened 2 years ago to the fashion district, which really was devastating for them. They're really in financial problems, but all of the projections of how good a deal this is for the city is based on nothing else ever happening there. Nobody wanting the building never improving, sales never improving, and people never going back to downtown. Based on what the mayor's doing, requiring people to go back to work, Comcast is doing, and businesses are doing, based on real estate sales, that type of projection doesn't ring true. Again, when we talk about the future, you can't say with any certainty what will happen, but you can bet on trends. The trends are Center City, Philadelphia is doing fine. Prices are up. People are moving back. There's lots of development, and it's unlikely that the building that is going to be destroyed or taken down or removed or demolished would have nobody who wants it. Maybe, but it's very unlikely. And the final point I'm going to make is there are a bunch of things in the report, in the legislation, and money set aside for that are additional studies. There's going to be overlays for what's going to happen to Chinatown, Washington Square. There are going to be studies of what to do with SEPTA and the transportation. None of these things are going to be known before the vote. So we don't know what actually is going to happen. We don't know what the projections are. We don't know what it will cost. So if there's an overlay that says you can't build higher than this, well, that will have a direct impact on the value of real estate and will cause there to be a reduction in the real estate assessments. None of that is factored in because none of it is known. So what we do know is the Sixers get a tremendous break. They get a break on their real estate tax. They get a break on their use and occupancy tax. They get to write off as a donation all of the money that goes to help them make it a special district. They get a write-off on all the money they get to spend to help them reach their minority hiring goals. And they get to write off in-kind contributions. And we know that the actual Chinatown businesses that are at risk, the most that they can get, if you average it out, $3 million over 380 businesses over 4 years, the most they can get is $1,000 a year per business. So that's what it is. There are a number of unaddressed questions. I know we want to talk about the election. We hopefully will get Councilman Squilla to come and talk with us and double check our numbers.
Can I just say something though?
Sure.
There is no vote on the horizon for this stadium. Public hearings on it don't even start until November 12th. So all of these questions will can probably be asked and answered starting on the 12th by the public.
Right, and we hope to get to that, and we will ask Councilman Squilla, and I will reach out to the Chinatown community and ask them if they would like to come on and discuss these things with us. I think your point's well taken. There is no vote coming up right away, but there are all of these significant questions. The most important being, are there other things we could do with this money that would have a better impact for people who have historically been shut out of economic development issues? There's no question that we need to address that. I think there is a fair question to be asked, what's the best way to do it? So we'll reach out to Councilmember Squilla. We'll see if he can come on the air with us soon, and we'll hopefully have a better understanding from his point of view of whether these numbers are correct or not.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for doing that. And I think that provides an even clearer snapshot of what we've been talking about for the last couple of years with this and why people are so concerned. And we're going to have a lot more to talk about as this goes on.
Right. Use and occupancy giveaway was something that was never mentioned. So no. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about that. Yeah. And hopefully I'll listen to the rest, and I'm hoping people do get out and vote. And I will say it does matter who you vote for, but it matters more that you get out and vote.
Yeah. Well, Lance, you're not going away yet because we need you on for predictions. And I'd like to also bring up Vanessa Maria Graber. Vanessa, how are you tonight?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So this is something that's been asked for by a few people. Would we make predictions on the election? And we have not done this in the past, but this year we said, okay, let's do it. I think that the best way to do this is to look at the swing states that will most likely decide this election. Those states are Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and of course, Pennsylvania. We all know what's happening. I don't know if there's anybody in our audience who doesn't know that there's an election coming up next week. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump for the presidency. And I do believe those 7 states will be the ones that make the impact, that will decide this election. I think the other states are more or less, you can say, okay, we know which way they're going. If anybody has a different opinion on that, that's fine. But what I'd like to start off with is if we can go through those states, and we'll do it in alphabetical order. So that means, Denise, you're first.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you each state, and you're going to tell me which candidate's going to win that state. All right?
First of all, if I could actually do that, I would pick lottery numbers for all of us, and we'd have a great new hall monitor studio that costs $11 billion and has robots operating everything for us. But here's the thing. The one bet that I tell people never to make with me is that I bet the American public is going to go into a voting booth and do something totally ridiculous. I won that bet in 2016. And while I got a lot of gas money, I also ended up having people yell at me because we got Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So I try really hard not to make predictions, but looking at the 7 states that you mentioned, the biggest argument for the popular vote becoming the law of the land that I've ever seen.
Yep.
I think
let's go in order. Let's start with Wisconsin.
Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are going to have the same.
Pennsylvania's
right,
last.
But I think Wisconsin, a lot of these states are too close to call.
I got to make a choice.
I know. I'm trying. But I think Harris has an outside shot of winning Wisconsin, because a lot of the stuff that the Republicans tried to do in terms of pinning down unions hasn't been successful.
Yeah.
So I think she has a shot there.
Michigan.
Nevada.
Okay.
Honestly, if you can rent out the Globe at there's this big Globe thing in Vegas that basically the Harris Waltz campaign has commandeered for weeks now. I think they have a shot there as well because of unions.
Okay.
Unions are going to play a big part in this election. Now, granted, the Teamsters didn't endorse because there was a thing with some of their rank and file wanting Trump. So they didn't endorse, but you have individual Teamsters chapters that have endorsed Harris Waltz. Mm-hmm. So I still think the unions will play a big part in a lot of these places, especially like Michigan. Where it might get interesting in Michigan is that you have the folks in Dearborn, which is one of the largest Muslim Arab communities in the country, that are saying, well, we don't like her because we don't like Kamala Harris because, and I think this is as much a function of not knowing civics as it is anything else, her policies have led to the genocide when she wasn't the president.
Yeah.
But she's going to get blamed for that. And you even had some Muslim leaders in Michigan endorse Donald Trump, Muslim ban and all. So Michigan is going to be a lot closer than it needs to be.
Who gets it?
I think Harris, but not by much.
Okay.
But one thing she's got going for her is Gretchen Whitmer is the governor of Michigan, and she's very, very popular.
Arizona.
Man, I think Arizona is probably going to go red. And the reason why I say that is because there are so many shenanigans going on with voting in Arizona that it's totally possible that it'll go red, but probably not intentionally.
All right. Georgia.
Georgia went blue in 2020, and everybody is still really shocked about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it too is too close to call. Although the fact that it's something we're talking about means that it's winnable for the Democrats, but I'm not sure how.
So Trump?
To me, it's too close to call.
Got to call.
Okay, I'll have to say Trump because it's just that close.
North Carolina.
Harris.
Okay. And
And
the Keystone State.
Pennsylvania, where we have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and the rest is Alabama. I think Pennsylvania is going to go blue because I think that Philadelphia and the 5-county Philadelphia area is really going to come out and vote. And despite what Josh Shapiro likes to tell you, how we go, so goes the state.
Yeah. Okay. Lance, you're up.
No, let's let Vanessa go next. She has more experience, and she's not going to be with us. She'll be in Puerto Rico, so she may have a better feel for what's happening than I do.
All right. Vanessa, Wisconsin.
I think Wisconsin might go to Harris. Wisconsin has some progressive cities there. I think it will largely be determined by the voter turnout in places like Milwaukee County and Madison. And so I'm going to call it for Harris.
Michigan.
Yeah, I want to clarify something that Denise said, because I don't agree with what she said at all about Muslim and Arab voters. The reason why they do not want to vote for Kamala Harris is not because they believe that she's responsible for the current policies. It's because she said that she would not call for an arms embargo and that she would continue to support Israel and that she would defend Israel very vigorously. And those statements are the reasons why people feel she's complicit in the genocide, right? She's also said that there would be no change from the Biden administration policy. And she has supported the arms deals that have continued to take place throughout the year. And so I want to be clear, like, Muslim and Arab voters they know how the government works. It's Harris's own policy statements and her positioning on what's happening there that I think will cost her the state. The majority of Muslim voters there are considering voting third party. So I don't think she's going to win Michigan.
Okay.
But my question for you, and this goes back to something that I've been saying a lot. She is the current vice president. What is she supposed to say?
Okay.
She's the current vice president.
We are running out of time, so we have to do this.
Yeah, when she is vice president, she said she could say, when I am president, I will change this policy, right?
All right.
Nevada, I think, is going to go for Harris because there's a large number of Latinos, and I think Latinos are largely supporting Harris. I think the most recent comments that occurred at Madison Square Garden, have really incited people to vote for her, and I think that there's a lot of union organizing there as well. So I'm going to call it for Harris.
Arizona.
I think Arizona, being a border state, is going to go to Trump. Georgia, I think, is also going to go to Trump.
North Carolina.
I think North Carolina, because of what happened with the natural disasters there, the flooding, the lack of response from FEMA, despite what the federal government says, there are still many people there complaining about the response. I'm not even sure if they've been able to restore polling locations. Like, I think that's really going to impact. I lived in North Carolina for 4 years. It's a pretty red state. There's only a couple pockets of progressive counties. And so, and in Western North Carolina, especially, they're red. So I'm going to say North Carolina is going to Trump as well.
Pennsylvania.
I think Trump is going to win Pennsylvania.
You got Trump winning the election.
Yes.
Yep. Lance?
Well, I'll just say one thing about Pennsylvania, though. I would be remiss. There's just been such disorganization here with the Democratic Party leadership and the Harris campaign. There's a political article written about it Also, the Inquirer did a nice piece, explaining all the turmoil, all of the organizing and, mobilizing has really happened in the last month. Well, they really should have started this process 6 months ago. And so I think for that reason, the voter turnout's still going to be pretty low in a lot of the places that they're trying to organize people here in Philadelphia. And I think what happened in Butler, PA, the assassination attempt has also really mobilized people in Trump's favor. They've both spent a lot of time here, but I still think that my critique is that the DNC really fumbled the ball when it comes to Philadelphia and Pennsylvania voters.
All right, Lance, Wisconsin.
Evers and his machine win that for Harris.
Michigan.
I think Harris, because of the unions and because of the John Deere quote.
Nevada.
Trump saying, I'm keeping John Deere here, and John Deere saying, we never told him that.
Yeah. Nevada.
Nevada, I think, again, for Harris because of the culinary workers and the Unite Here folks.
Arizona.
I think that we are so afraid of people we shouldn't be afraid of that it goes for Trump.
Georgia.
I think that's Trump. I don't see the ability to flip that as well. Although not being there, it's very difficult to know how motivated the community is that supported Biden.
North Carolina.
So North Carolina, I think because of the insane Republican governor is going to lose a lot of Republicans, not because they're going to vote for a Jewish candidate to be governor on the Democratic side, but they're just not going to show up. I mean, there's a man who's a self-described black Nazi. I don't want to go into what he does with his private life, but he does claim that he's a born-again Christian, and they're incongruous what he does with his private life and what he says everyone else should do with their lives.
Okay. So that's for Harris?
Yes.
And Pennsylvania.
So I'm going to say I live in a condo. It's really hard to door knock me. And I've been door knocked now 3 times. Now, I'm registered as an independent, so I am not a Democrat. But if that's an indication of who it is that's reaching out, I think they're actually going to pull it off here. In my personal circle, I know people who have come from states that are securely for Harris, like Massachusetts, where I grew up. My people I did politics with many years ago were sending 50 to 100 people every weekend into here to do the door knocking. So I do recognize that the Democratic Party may not do what we hoped, but it's so hard for me to understand how I can get 3 people knocking on my door and them not doing a good job with everyone else.
Because they're probably not working for the DAC. They're probably
They are
working.
not. They're no.
Right.
Well,
None of
most
them are working for
people
the
that
DNC.
are
It's not the
doing door
DNC.
knocking are coming
just saying.
from, like, there's a bus from Howard University
Right.
of kids that are supposed to be coming this weekend. Higher Heights has been here several times. The New Pennsylvania Project has people door knocking. So while you're probably right, Vanessa, they're probably not DNC people. These are people who are doing it in spite of the DNC.
And
So
again, just
go
clearly, to get to see me, you have to do a buzzer. You have to wait for me to let you in. I mean, you really have to want to see me. And, I think I qualify as a likely voter because I vote all the time, but I'm also an unknown voter because I'm not registered. So it's Larry's turn.
So just for the record, of those 7 states, I have Kamala winning all 7. So you're gonna
Wow,
go.
you're an optimist.
We're
Yeah.
not following you to the
Best,
track.
obviously.
But let me point something out about North Carolina, because you mentioned the gentleman that's running for governor on the Republican side. He is proof that opposition research is not what it used to be.
No.
Because I don't know how, when he became lieutenant governor, people missed all of that.
All right. Well, we have to wrap it up
how
here.
they missed all of that.
So we will be back next week on Wednesday to see. We may not know by then, but we'll see where we are on Wednesday night. And so we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.
Yeah, and be sure to tune in to WPPM's Pacifica Network coverage. Larry's going to be calling in from Philadelphia, representing the station, and they'll have coverage on election night. So make sure you tune in to WPPM. See you next time.